I'm hoping that you've watched the first episode that's kind of geared you up to this episode. Now, in the last one, I talked about how much of your life is in your hands. In this one, I'm actually going to talk about the conditioning that we face all around us that causes us to perhaps feel as though we don't actually have our life in our hands. And indeed makes us feel like we don't really have the choices that we genuinely do have, no matter how big or how small they might be. So, how is conditioning affecting our lives and where does it come from? So, I can ask you that personally, first of all, but really what I want to do is touch on certain conditioning, the bigger ones, so that we can go from right out here and you can then practice bringing it in to a much more personal experience. So I work in schools all over the country and I have done that for 2 years now. I'm in the third academic year of doing that. And certainly from my own school experience, and perhaps you can draw on this yourself, one thing I'm still noticing is that our conditioning comes both from our schools, but actually also from our parents. And then we see it in advertising, in the world around us, in other people's conditioning that gets pushed into our space that causes the reinforcement of these beliefs to be perhaps solid and part of us. Now, I'm going to give a big one out there so that you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. In school, there's this message, and I still ask classrooms this, and I still get the same response. How many of you hear the story of get your good grade so that you can have a good life? And I'm actually sensitive to the fact that I might be speaking to you now, and you might have this still in your head. The idea that good qualifications equals a good life. Now, that can be a strong message in schools and in education because it perhaps motivates. The idea is to inspire the work to be done so that it pays off in the end, and that can be great. The thing that I'm also noticing is how it's actually A, not working, and B, how both my mentality and the mentality of students right now are actually experiencing the other side of that coin. So if we have over here grades are the key to a good life, then what's the other side of that coin? Either you know or you don't, but I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it now. If grades equals a good life, then no grades equals a bad life. And this actually is quite a strong point for me personally because I didn't do as well as I wanted to in school. And I had that conditioning rammed into me very, very, very early on. And I lived with it and I held it as a strong belief. The fact that I didn't do as well as I thought, so to me I had bad grades, meant that I wasn't allowed to have a good life. And that's part of a conditioning and part of a belief that can actually hold us down because that means that if we do get good grades, then it's almost like we are entitled to a good life. We don't recognize that we still have to work. And if we don't get good grades, we may either feel like it's going to be impossible to have a good life, or indeed that there's no hope at all, which I guess maybe are the same things. But you understand where I'm coming from. So these are the sorts of things that we can be conditioned to believe. There's another one that's involved in it as well. And I noticed this is not necessarily universally true, but I know that it's a message that's being put out there, certainly in certain newspapers and certain areas of the media. The idea that having wealth means that you are intrinsically a bad person, because in order to have wealth, someone would need to suffer. So here's another one that I've noticed that seems to be a belief system with a lot of people who feel like wealth equals bad. And on the other side, for some reason then, that must mean that if wealth is bad, then that's got to mean that not having wealth is good. And I, again, have met people, and I myself have gone through this experience of feeling as though not having money is some sort of moral high ground because you're not then maybe undermining or subjugating other people to earn money. And of course, we can see this represented in a capitalist society, particularly here in the UK, where we are bombarded, let's say, with messages about people who don't pay their taxes and how rich people are obnoxious and how people who get luxuries somehow aren't allowed them or don't deserve them because they don't seem to have done the work. Much like this idea that reality TV stars haven't done anything, they've got no talent, so how dare they have money? Which actually ties to another belief of intelligence equals wealth, which goes back to the get grades, get money situation. But we're not addressing the reality of grades don't necessarily determine your future, though they help. Wealth does not equal bad. There are good people out there doing good work who have a lot of money. And there are intelligent people out there who actually can't earn any money because intelligence and wealth aren't actually connected really. Because in order to earn money, you just need to have the belief and the confidence to be able to go out there and find where your value lies so that you can go and earn money. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be worldly. And of course, you even have to check, what does being intelligent really mean? So I bring these things to you for you to consider where you have conditions in your head that are laid upon a certain lifestyle, a certain group of people, any area where you feel like there's a rule applied to a certain system, and then ask yourself where that rule's being broken. Because that will demonstrate how you've been conditioned to believe something, and indeed how it then has an impact on just how you behave and how you see the world. So I'm going to ask you this now, and I'm going to let you sit with this for a moment. Where in your mind do you actually feel like you have been conditioned to believe something that actually doesn't help you move forward? I'm giving a pause here because I really want you to consider this. It's a tough one because there's so many things that are strong beliefs in us that we don't even recognize that they're conditioning. Here's another example. I drive a lot, I travel a lot, and I notice that road rage is perhaps a byproduct, not just because of conditioning, but I know that it can be a trigger for people's moods when things don't work the way they need to work on the road. And of course, you can argue that certain rules on the road are there for safety, and well, all of them technically are. But I notice how frustrated people can get when other people don't follow the rules on the road. When I was learning to drive, my driving instructor actually told me to drive as though everyone else on the road didn't know how to drive. And the purpose of that was to prepare myself for the fact that not everyone is going to play by the rules. And you learn that very quickly on the road. Not everyone is going to play by the rules. And actually, we can also say to ourselves that we're not all perfect drivers, in that in our time driving, we all will have broken the law in some way, some facet at some time, be it small or big. Now, that doesn't make it okay, but what I am saying is that the conditioning of the expectation that's within us to go, everyone should be following the rules, can have the impact of when someone doesn't follow the rules and people lose their temper. And that anger can come from a place where they have been told, they have learnt and been conditioned to believe that everyone should abide by the rules. Even when a lot of the time, in many other places, they don't. And again, it's not to necessarily ignore the law or the rules. That's not what I'm suggesting here. But it's to allow ourselves the peace to be able to get on with our day without losing our temper, so that we can actually just move through the world without getting angry at everything. So us getting triggered by people not using their indicators and stuff is no longer a problem, because we're like, well, everyone, I'm not perfect. You know, it'd be nice if they didn't do that, but I'll just continue on and get on with my day and do that. And this conditioning can actually have a great impact in terms of how much freedom we give ourselves to actually live our own lives. Because the more that we put on other people in regards to our conditioning, the more we're actually holding ourselves back from doing what it is we really feel like doing or being. So another condition could be the idea, or belief again, could be the idea that men and women are supposed to behave a certain way. Now, here in the UK, I'd like to think that we are indeed still open to this area of gender constructs and so on. Now, I am of the ilk where anyone can be whatever they like, and there are no rules applied to that. If we are born whatever and we choose to live our lives whatever, then great. And I'm all for that. I'm all for everyone living the way they want to live. And I don't necessarily hold the rules of what men and women should or should not behave like. Because as far as I'm concerned, when you say should, or any form of that, must, have to, that is the conditioning. That's the belief coming out. And it doesn't allow room to recognize that actually, if we're suggesting that other people should live this way, then we are actually telling ourselves the same thing. And we may not realize that. So I'll ask you this one. I'll ask you this one as a question that I feel has just come into me, and I'm going to share it with you, right? Where in terms of human behavior do you feel people should really behave? And the second part of that question is, what is that should based on? Now, that's just in terms of the external world. That's looking out at society around you, okay? Now, that might be a priming question, because the second question I'm going to ask you is, how do you feel you should behave? And again, what is that based on? So if you've got to any insight within that thought, then I want you to explore that a little bit further. Shoulds are a dangerous thing. They're a huge part of cultural norms, of people's belief, how everyone should live, and how they impact everyone else. You see, if we don't unlearn this process of recognizing that we do indeed have the freedom to live how we want to live, then we allow ourselves to become victim to other people's expectations of what we're supposed to be doing on this planet, which is basically be whatever we want to be and live our life the way we want to live it. And we can't really say that we're actually living our life if we're still abiding by the shoulds and the rules and the laws of what everyone else says. That's not necessarily actually enforced by law. So it's important to look at your conditioning. It's important to look at your beliefs so that you're not holding yourself back, because that's honestly what can happen. So let me try this last question here, and then we'll move on. So this last question I have for you is, what's the biggest thing that's getting in your way that will stop you from getting where you want to go? So, quick story, just to round this off. And of course I'm going to make it personal, because for me, a lot of it needs to be, not as evidence, not as scientific proof or anything like that. It's anecdotal, but it's just an example that if you listen to it, perhaps you're going to see some similarity or some familiarity in the story to yourself, and you'll be able to adapt whatever insight that you get from this. Excuse me. So as I said, our beliefs can hold us back. Now, I had the running belief that indeed only wealthy people were bad and being poor was some kind of moral high ground. I was of that mentality. There are many other belief structures I had running, but I don't need to go into all of them right now. But nonetheless, what was happening was that I was actually holding myself back to who I really was. I also had this belief structure of gender constructs and so on, and I was actually being quite sexist when I was putting that out there. Even though I said I was about gender equality, my words, my actions, and my thoughts weren't actually in line with that. So even my intention didn't actually match my action. So what was getting in my way was the fact that because of my beliefs, I didn't think about actually going out there and really earning money. I didn't realize that I wasn't necessarily a stereotype of a man, but I felt like I should be or needed to be in order to fit in, which meant I wasn't actually respecting myself a lot of the time, nor was I actually appreciating myself for who I really was a lot of the time. And it caused a huge level of self-esteem problems moving forward, and indeed just traversing through the world, because I was trying to find what I wanted to do and who I was, while also taking on all of these messages of what these beliefs were in my head. So all the external things were coming into my head, reinforcing the thing that actually was holding me back. And I wasn't aware of it. So it was actually doing me a great disservice to have these beliefs in my head. And so again, I want to ask you for the last time, what is the biggest belief or condition that is in your way that's stopping you from getting you where you want to go? Thank you very much for watching this episode. Of course, if you're binge watching this, then I'll see you very shortly in the next one. But if you're not, take a day, think about these questions. You can come back and watch them again and see what comes up. Take care.